Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Devesh Pandit and I am with E4 Security Consulting. And today I am going to talk to you about multi-factor authentication. Let's talk about authentication. What is an authentication? An authentication is a trusted mechanism that instills confidence. So basically, we are looking for some sort of confidence that drives the whole process. This authentication enables confidentiality because only the authorized people have access to the data. At the same time, it preserves the integrity because only the authorized people can make changes, they can add, change, or delete the data. At the same time, it guarantees the availability of data because the organization has practiced the BCDR plan, has enforced the policy, and have tested the recovery procedure. That makes it completion of the CIA triad, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So, in other words, the authentication gives some confidence that trusted mechanism is in place, and that gives us confidence that by authentication we can achieve confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So we are familiar with user ID and password that we have been using for many years, and that is the most weakest link that we have found, and we have heard many horror stories about password breaches, etc. And we have come a long way from learning the lessons, and we have improved a lot on making a complex user ID and a complex user password and policies and enforcing that. But the fact is, even we have evolved the user ID that is given to us, that remains as the factor that remains, that is something we know. At the same time, the password we create is also something that which we know, and that is a problem because when we are talking about multi-factor authentication, when we are authenticating with user ID and password, and which both kind are something you know, that means two other factors are missing. So multi-factor, according to NIST, is the most basic security tool. If it is the most basic security tool, and if we are just using only one factor, then we are definitely jeopardizing our security. Some people are using two-factor authentication. That is, fine. But today we are talking about more than two, multi-factor. Multi means more than two. So what does it make multi-factor? So multi-factor means what do you know, what do you have, and who you are. So if you have something that you have and who you are that you always carry with you, and what do you know, that was something given by your organization. So in this example that we have taken, what we know is there, but what is missing is what you have and who you are. Meaning the organization is not collecting the biometric data. And further, the direction is given that customization and enhancements are welcome on multi-factor authentication, and we will talk about it in little detail in coming slide. So let's talk about this first. So what do you know, what you have, and who you are? These are the three components of multi-factor authentication. And as I was saying, two of these factors are missing. So if you do not have biometric, and if you are going to add biometric, we have to make sure that biometric data, when we implement biometric in our organization, that data must be stored securely. Why? Because once you convert biometric data into hexadecimal or whatever, once you store it, it gets stored as some sort of hexadecimal or binary data. So it needs to be encrypted, and probably you should store that data behind a couple of firewalls so that it doesn't see the sunlight. Uh, the point in case is user ID and password pair is not enough. Even though you are challenging with user ID and you are challenging with password, but both factors are considered as something you know, and two other factors are missing. All right. So what we are talking here, we are talking about daring the attack, and what kind of attack we are talking about. So the attack is on your credentials, and we want to thwart the attack by, you know, becoming some creative, and we want to create some creative challenges. So we want to dare the attacker. Okay, so we want to challenge them, and we want to dare to challenge, and we want to remove the human intervention. There is a reason for this, because we sometimes become kind, or sometimes we are under pressure, or sometimes we have superior standing in front of us, and we have to look other side, and we have to let uh, things happen. So these are the human factors that we all see as a security practitioner. Uh, you know, so we want to reduce that factor. We want to reduce that. That is why remove human intervention. So introduce some sequencing, and that can be done through some programming. And artificial intelligence is coming in play, and we shall talk about this in little detail. But at the most, what we can do, we can implement policies and procedures so that we can dare to challenge. We can remove the human intervention, and we can blame on policy and procedure. Say, look, we have this policy in place, and we have this procedure in place, and this is the sequence that I am given, and that is why I am challenging you to produce this multi-factor authentication. Now, when I say multi-factor, it could be more than three, and that also we will see in a minute. So, what makes a multi-factor authentication a success? What are the absolutes? More than one factor has to be present, that is given. General observation is that less than two factor makes it a weaker proposition. We have seen it, and we have practiced it for many years. One factor used multiple times is still considered as the same factor. And I was reading PCI DSS requirements, and they have spelled it out in their requirement that one factor used multiple times, it is considered as the same factor. So the general observation is asking for a second password. So you ask for a password, and then you are asking for a second password. That is still considered the second kind of a factor. So that is also considered the same factor, so that won't cut it. So each factor applied has to be mutually exclusive, meaning you have to have a separate kind of factor applied to the access control, meaning each of the factor must be applied at least once. All right. So if a factor is repeated, then the remaining of the other kind factors must be present. So we will see this in an example. So let's get going. But the point in case is, if you implement your multi-factor authentication in this manner, then it will definitely be a success. All right. So when you are devising your system, you are writing your code, or you are writing your policies or procedure, how do you want to present your multi-factor authentication and how you want to verify your multi-factor authentication and how the verification is possible. So, point in case is when all conditions are met and when all policies are enforced and when all procedures are followed, and I have highlighted followed, okay? You might have documented good policy and good procedures, but if it is not followed, then everything goes down to the sink. So that doesn't help. So it has to be followed. Once it is not followed, nothing works. So accepting three factor means what? That means factor 1 and factor 2 and factor 3. So that's what we are saying. We are talking about logical AND. Okay, logical AND meaning I'm going to do this decimal 7 binary representation here. So 0 is represented as 0, 0, 0. That yields 0. And I will take another example. Let's do this decimal 4. Decimal 4 will produce 1, 0, 0. And if you do a logical AND, and this is coming out of my computer science degree, 1 and 0 and 0, that will yield 0. Or if you can think of it, if you do not have a computer science background, think of it as a serial circuit. And if you have this switch off, this switch on and this switch off, then if you don't have bulbs here, and if you have this switch is on, for example, but you don't have bulbs here, then this will not, the circuit will not be completed. This bulb will not light up. So that way, decimal 7, okay, so you have factor 1 present, factor 2 present, factor 3 present, and you are ending it. So 1 and 2 and 3. So I have color-coded this one, color-coded this one, color-coded that one, and the result is 1. So the point in case is you can mix and match. You can mix and match and you can write your policy in a way that you can get a proper sequencing and programming result. So we will take one more example, and the next slide is kind of little busy, but I want to make a point. So just bear with me. I will try to make it very interesting. So hang on. Okay, so strategy and control design. So how you are going to do this multi-factor authentication programming, or how you are going to design this. So the first column is strategy and programming. Second column that you have is your factor 1, and then you have your conditioning and factor 2, and then you are going to apply your conditioning, and then factor 2, factor 3, and then you have your result. All right, so these are the columns that you have, and sequencing and policy and procedures for authentication. So now if you are writing a policy and procedure for VPN access, and you have to implement VPN access. So how you are going to do your multi-factor authentication policy and programming implementation. So factor 1, you are just writing your policy that you have to have a three-factor, factor 1, 2, and 3, and you have to present. And you are not specifying, not in a particular order, something you know, something you are, and something you have. So if the procedure does not specify any particular order, then you can present factor 1, factor 2, and factor 3 in any particular order, and you are going to get an access. Now, company B, okay, is smart enough, must have attended my webinar, and what they have done, they have written their policy, and their policy requires that they should have three factors, factor 2, 1, and 3, and they have to follow a procedure, and that procedure would be that the sequencing of the factor presented has to be in this particular order. That person has to present factor number 2, factor number 1, and factor number 3 in that particular sequence. If the sequence is not followed, then you don't gain access. If the sequence is followed, then you gain access. So let's take an example. So this guy comes in and inadvertently he presents factor number 1, something you have. Then he presents sequence number, factor number 2, something you know. And then he presents, factor number 3, something you are. So according to the procedure, he is not going to get an access because he presented the wrong sequencing. Now, according to the policy, he did present 3 factors, 2, 1, and 3. But according to the procedure failed. So this guy needs some training. So we provided him some training and he comes back and says, okay, let's do this again. So VPN access at location 1, policy this, procedure that. And he follows the procedure, provides factor number 2 first, and then sequencing of factor number 1, and then factor number 3. And then procedure was followed, correct sequencing was followed, and 3 factors were provided. And yes, correct sequencing and 3 factors were provided. Both conditions match, and the access was granted. So that's what we are talking about. That is called multi-factor authentication with enhancement. And what was I saying earlier? Well, I forgot. Examples of above and beyond. All right. So let's take an example of that. So let's say you are trying to get an access to high security area, and where you have defined a policy that you should have, you must have factor number 1 and factor number 2, two types of factor 1 and 1 type of factor 2 and 1 type of factor 3. So here you have 4 factors. That's what I want to make a point here. So something you are. So they are asking for 2 biometrics. The first one would be fingerprint and second would be retina scan. And then something you have and then something you know. And then if you have presented this in a particular sequence, fingerprint first, retina scan second, and then something you have, that is your card access, and then something you know, your PIN number, and that is a correct sequence. So you have followed your policy and you have also followed your procedure. That means everything is correct according to your policy and according to your procedure. Everything is the way you want it, so you can grant the access. So multi-factor authentication, this is how the strategy and control design is created, sequencing and policy for procedure and authentication. So now if you want to implement more than 4 factor, you can do that. Something you have, for example, here we say that you have a token and you want to add one more smart card, for example, token and a smart card. All right. Then you have a 5th factor. So, and you can add, it depends on it depends on what you are trying to protect. Okay, if you are trying to protect something very high value asset, then you have to have more factors so that a bad guy cannot come and do some damage and challenge your credentials. So this is what multi-factor authentication strategy and control design with the enhancement of policy and programming. All right. So some implementation guideline. Let's talk about that. So definitely you want to take a realistic incident management bridge scenario for the remote access point for which you are trying to implement this multi-factor authentication, conduct a risk analysis, and accept the residual risks. And based on that, whatever you have identified your critical access points, evaluate the access point by identifying the remote location and their associated critical assets they are trying to protect. Define the working of the assets, how these assets are working, because if you are protecting, for example, car data, or if you are protecting a nuclear plant, okay, or something, some high value asset behind a multi-factor asset, multi-factor authentication, then you want to add more factors and you want to make it more secure. So you want to define the working of the asset, what you are trying to protect. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to put an emphasis on. And then you select the factors. Okay, what factors will make any impact on the security, what I'm trying to secure, etc. So based on that, based on your risk analysis and accepted residual risk, you are going to develop your policy, you are going to write your procedures, and then you are going to program your device, whatever the device is. It could be as simple as you are going to educate your security guard or whatever, So it could be anything. It could be writing a procedure for a receptionist, for example. I'm just making it up. But let's say you are programming it for firewall to give a VPN access. So in that case, you have to implement some sort of artificial intelligence. You are going to program your IPS in a way that you are going to challenge the person who is trying to gain access, and you are going to ask this kind of challenging questions, or you are going to challenge that the person who is going to get the access. Use some secure card technologies that includes biometrics. All right. So these are some implementation guidelines, and new technologies are coming into the play. And let's get going. So implement a multi-factor authentication today. Now you know how important it is, and get at least 3 factors in a VPN. Less than 3 is not acceptable, because when you say multi-factor, meaning meaning more than 2, it is if it was meant for 2, then they would spell it out as 2, but they are saying multi-factor, meaning it has to be more than 2. So I'm going to leave this webinar with you with a scenario. We will take this example and consider this to enhance our learning experience. And this is just to fix the problem, fix the process. And we want to analyze this technically. We don't want to point any fingers at any person, or we want to fix the process. All right. So here we go. We have an admin. The admin is a very qualified technician and has a lot of experience and has no negative reputation of any kind. All right. So she had to travel about 50 miles, and she entered the data center, and she realized that she has forgotten her token. And if she returns to get her token, her presence will be noticed. And she figures that if she calls somebody, okay, and if that trusted person can read her display from the token, then she can happily, get the job done. And that's how she did her job. And nobody came to know what happened. And the problem was fixed. Everybody was happy. But as a security manager, this is a scenario I'm presenting to you. So let's fix this problem. So this is your homework, and I want you to fix the problem. All right, using multi-factor authentication. All right. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate that. Please like, share, and subscribe to my educational channel. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.